Okay, so welcome to our Power Hour tonight. Our presenter is a member of Showtime Toastmasters. He's our current Sergeant at Arms. Please help me welcome Warren Folkerts.
Thank you, Bobby, and welcome. I appreciate all of you showing up tonight. I'm going to make an assumption about this audience, and that is either you have finished your taxes or you have filed your extensions so that you don't have to complete your filing by today. And thank you for being here. I appreciate this. We're going to talk tonight about the best practices for virtual meetings at work. Bobby and I had a previous discussion about this, and this is a particular experience that I've had in the past year where I've started to learn more about doing virtual meetings. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've learned, including some of the pitfalls that I've experienced as well. So many of my lessons were through the School of Hard Knocks. But let's begin. Back in March of 2020, or before March of 2020, this looks like the meeting room that I was in. We'd be sitting around the table. We'd have ideas up on the board, a whiteboard, possibly some drawings up on the wall, and we were discussing things. And there might be on the table a speakerphone for one more member of the group to work with us. But by and large, we were all in the same room working close together. And then, as you all know, in 2020, we started to shelter in place and things changed. When it changed, the meeting room was empty, except for the speakerphone that was still there. We had to start the transition to virtual meetings. And in my own case, I remember on March 18th, I had a meeting and I emptied some things out of my office in the morning because I was going to begin sheltering in place. I figured I needed about 4 to 6 weeks of material to take with me because I'll be back in probably 6 weeks, no more. And at 2 p.m., I had a meeting in the afternoon, my first virtual meeting. It was my first act of work from home. And sure enough, at about 1:57, the doorbell rang. But in this transition to virtual meetings, there were several things that were, in my mind at least, I'm not good at this. I was at the dining room table. There were distractions around me. I was trying to get a connection going. It was all very new to me. But in time, I started to get the hang of it. I started to learn more about how to deal with these virtual meetings. And I'm hoping that I can share some of that experience with you tonight. Now, the virtual meeting component is here to stay. It's not going to go away when we start to return to work. Some businesses are downsizing their real estate. I know people who have been told that their office is going away and they are going to continue working from home, regardless of whether other people go back to work or not. So the virtual meeting is going to be there as an active part of our business. Along with that, there are many workers who want to continue to telework. About a week ago, there was a Dilbert comic. I wish I could put it up, but there are licensing considerations. But at any rate, the boss talked to the group about returning to work. And the group, without question, did not want to do it. So I believe one line was, "I would rather die first." And the boss's final statement was, he knew this would happen if he showed them some happiness. So many workers want to continue to telework even when they will have the opportunity to return to work. And the employers are recognizing that. And telework has transitioned from something off to the side for many companies to being more in the mainstream of their business model for how their employees will work at their company. So with this telework in the mainstream, once again, the virtual meeting and managing virtual meetings are going to be very much of our life. And I believe in time, we're all going to become more and more adept at handling these meetings. Now, there are advantages to virtual meetings. We're all gathered around the table. No one must sit in the back corner. Some of you have probably been in conference rooms, as I have, where there are more attendees than there is space at the table. And some people do wind up sitting at the back table or at the back corner. And they're not really in the flow of things as much. Now, sometimes you can get people who have the personality that they can manage that back corner just as well as when they're at the table, and that's fortunate. But for others, they turn into wallflowers. So with the virtual meeting, it can promote greater participation from the group because we're all equals at the table. It's not where anyone is any closer to anyone else in discussing the matter. We're on a more equal footing. So there are these benefits to having the virtual meetings. But there's also new challenges in going virtual. The technology, video conferencing software, there's Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, and others out there. In the case of my company right now, we're transitioning from, the default is Skype, but we're transitioning over to Microsoft Teams. So we have to learn that new software and how to use that, how to start up meetings. I just today received email on when there will be training for me to attend, because on June 11th, I'm going to Microsoft Teams. Now I've used it some already. We'll talk a little more about that. And then also, as I said, there's Zoom. Now, in the workplace, the fact of the matter is that you're going to have to use all of these, or many of these, or you may find yourself faced with many of these. If you're in a situation like mine, most of my work are with people in the same company. However, we do have conference calls with companies that provide products to us, vendors, and support those products. And so we find ourselves, in my first Microsoft Teams meetings were actually from the vendor when he set a meeting, when the vendor set up a meeting for us. And so all of a sudden I was thrown into it somewhat cold as to how to manage Microsoft Teams. It was my first exposure to it. So it's imperative that you develop at least a rudimentary familiarity with each product that'll be in your meeting arsenal, that you can work with these different products and have a familiarity, because from time to time you may have to jump tracks from one to the other. For example, with Skype/Microsoft Teams, that's what we'll use with smaller groups. Within my company, if you're going to be participating in a meeting, say, of more participants, let's say 50 to 150, it's going to be Zoom. So you have to have the familiarity with the other technology. The other challenge here, though, is the hardware. You may be on a PC, you may be using a tablet, a phone, or something else. You have to manage your microphone and camera, and you have to gain familiarity with your configuration components. During my normal workday, I attach to a desktop machine at work. Accordingly, in normal meetings, I don't have a camera, so I have to deal with that. In fact, I don't even have a microphone, so I have to set up the meeting where I use the dial-in access, or it calls me, for the microphone and speaker element. But you have to have a familiarity with your configuration components. And I'll add one more piece of hardware as well. Many of us are working from home, so we're all depending on the infrastructure of our internet service provider in our neighborhood. And I can say in the last year that almost everyone in my department at one time or other has run into an issue where they weren't able to attend a meeting because of an internet problem. It's gotten better. It doesn't happen that often, but there is that element as well of how to deal with possible losses of your internet connection. And there are other challenges going virtual. As I mentioned, the hardware and the software, the technology, the meeting organizers need to know the attendees. They need to know what's out, what their group uses, and if there are some limitations, and be prepared for that. They may have varying hardware configurations, as I described. They may not have cameras, but they're still able to see the shared image of someone presents a PowerPoint or an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. They can see the shared desktop from other people's workstations. However, as I mentioned, in the loss of, say, the internet service for a bit, it may be that they have to resort to their telephone. And for that, all they'll have is audio. And if you're scheduling a meeting and you recognize that somebody is in the midst of an internet outage, then you have to recognize that they may only have the audio component and try to manage that accordingly. So that brings us to the next point. Always include a dial-in option. For many, that's the safety net, the fallback position. That's what you have to rely on if you run into problems with your other connection. Now there's a matter of organizing the virtual meeting. It's like any other meeting that you have. It's really no different. You have to identify the planned objective and ask yourself, why are we meeting? Is a meeting necessary? If it is, then you proceed down further with the plan. But the first thing to consider is you're calling in the time of other people. You're spending their time on this meeting. Be sure that this is worth the time that's going to be expended, that it's not something that could be possibly managed with email or some other means where you don't all have to gather at the same time in the same virtual location to work through the subject matter that you plan for your meeting. Once again, is the meeting necessary? And you also have to think a bit about which meeting software package you will need. We seem to have a bit of a boundary as to when we would use Microsoft Teams as opposed to Zoom. So you have to consider how many participants are you having in this meeting and plan accordingly and schedule accordingly for whichever technology you're going to be using in the meeting. And you should also, if possible, verify that all invitees will be able to use that software. Will they have the familiarity with that software that they can proceed in and join in on the meeting that you have planned? And then you have to identify a time and date for the meeting. Hopefully in your company, you have access to the calendars of the attendees, and you can see when their time is available. You might also want to check to see if they have other meetings or other time blocked out on the calendar. And are you grabbing the only hour they have left in the day? If not, perhaps if that's the case that you are selecting that 1 hour, perhaps you should look for a different time on a different day for the meeting, especially if this is going to be a key participant that you want in this meeting. It's just a matter of giving people a chance so that they are somewhat fresh when they attend the virtual meeting. And if at all possible, yes, as I said down there, avoid trying to grab the entire block of time between adjoining meetings. In organizing the meeting, be respectful of others' time, everyone's time. Don't schedule it any longer than is absolutely necessary. Plan out what you want to cover in the meeting and how long it should take to cover the particular material. Possibly scale it down so that you have one meeting for part 1 and another meeting for part 2, if the subject can be broken into 2 parts, and so that the people don't have to sit there staring at the computer screen for too long a period of time. So be respectful of everyone's time. Once again, as with every meeting, have a planned agenda. Fit your agenda into the allocated time and send out the agenda so that the attendees will know what the subject matter of the meeting is. So they'll have a chance to prepare, and hopefully in the course of the meeting, they can be more on task and more on point as the material is covered in the meeting. And finally, give sufficient advance notice if at all possible. Give people sufficient notice that the meeting is coming up. So once again, they can go back and look at the agenda, do any prior planning that they might have for the subject matter. And if the meeting is on very short notice, where we maybe went down the cubicle row and told people I'm going to have a meeting at a particular time, reach out to the people, possibly by phone, and just touch base with them to let them know that this meeting is coming up and it's in rather short notice, so that they don't miss the invitation when it comes in and they're working on something else possibly. In effect, what you're doing is, in these cases where you have to give short notice, you're making an extra effort to assure that the attendees will be at your meeting. Okay, so we want to start on time. To start on time, that's all in the preparation. The meeting leaders and presenters, prior to the meeting, You need to verify that everyone is ready for the meeting. Meet with the presenters and verify that the presentation materials are in place and that they can be displayed. I did that tonight with Bobby. I wanted to make sure that I arrived in plenty of time so that I had my ducks in a row and didn't start searching for my file while people were waiting for me to start talking. And also make sure that we could all see the presentation ahead of time. So by doing this, I saw a recommendation that you get online at least 15 minutes ahead of time to do the preparation. That may be kind of close if there are some serious issues. So possibly closer to 30 minutes ahead of time may be better, especially if it's a large meeting with a large group of attendees and there's perhaps a lot of material to be shared on the screen. I spoke with the meeting leaders. It's also important for the meeting participants to connect to the meeting prior to the start time and verify that video and audio are in good order. I had an experience a few weeks ago where I had to be in a different location for some virtual meetings. And as it would happen, I did not have an I did not have a laptop or desktop for the meeting, so I had to rely on my phone. It's a little uncomfortable when the meeting's going to start in 5 minutes and I'm trying to load Zoom onto my phone. And then later that day, the next morning we had another impromptu meeting. Then when I received the notice on my phone, it was a meeting for Microsoft Teams. So once again, I had to make a very quick install of Teams before I started the meeting. This goes back to what I spoke about with the hardware and technology before. Be familiar with your technology on the platforms you use, not just the platform you usually use. That's one thing that tripped me up a few weeks ago, but I'm wiser for the wear. Now it's meeting time. You want to start on time, hopefully with proper preparation. You're ready to go when the meeting starts. Once again, we're being respectful of people's time. We've done the proper preparations. You've gone through, you've prepared a checklist and checked it off, and you're now ready to begin. You verify that everyone is present and that you're ready to start. And you also, at this point, see if there are any technology issues. Despite all the preparation, sometimes someone will have a technology issue, and try to resolve those before proceeding. If it's a Zoom meeting, typically in Showtime, we have a Zoom master, and that person and the Zoom master is essential to helping people work out any last minute tech issues. So it's very important that you have someone that can help resolve these issues that may come up at the very start of the meeting that were not anticipated. It's been suggested that we open with an icebreaker. At the place that I work, the culture calls for every meeting to begin with what's called a safety minute. And what it is an opportunity for someone in the group to speak about safety in a current way. For example, right now it's starting to get hot. And so frequently on the safety minutes, the two things that I've heard most frequently are, it's getting hot, be careful to hydrate. And the other thing is, as it started to warm up, were several people warning that when you take your dog out for the walk in a more desert area, watch out for rattlesnakes. For some reason this year, there's been a larger report of rattlesnakes being seen by people in my department than usual. But what this icebreaker is supposed to do is get everyone in the flow, break the ice. We kind of had that tonight with a little bit of discussion before the meeting about the conference this past weekend. But it starts to get everybody more in sync with the meeting that's about to begin. And it brings everybody kind of onto the same page at the start. And then the first thing you do in the meeting is present your agenda for the meeting. Once again, this also helps people focus on their attention on the subject matter of the meeting and what's going to be discussed. You also note any updates or changes. By presenting the agenda at this point, there may be some people who didn't look closely at the agenda and they might be thinking in a different direction, but this helps move their focus over towards the subject matter that's about to be covered in the meeting. Now there's this matter of virtual meeting etiquette. Of course, there should also be etiquette in the conference room while we're all sitting around the table. But in the virtual environment, there are some other challenges and issues that we have to be careful of. The virtual meetings can be more productive if, once again, we have a leader who manages the dialogue and the flow. There may be some side conversations that come up as material is discussed. The leader can help curb these conversations so we stay on task, so we can finish with the objectives of the meeting by the scheduled end of the meeting. Also, with the virtual meeting, sometimes you can, while sitting at the computer screen, you're sitting in a room and there might be some things that distract the participants. The leader can help facilitate getting people to stay more focused on the meeting. It says here, as giving everyone the opportunity to speak. What it taught, and one of the things that I read, although I don't recall that I've ever experienced this in the meeting, but it sounds like a good idea, that at various points, the leader will go around the room and have everyone discuss, share their thoughts on what's being discussed. I would add one suggestion though, and that is that the leader mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that they will do that from time to time. I believe that will help keep people more focused on it too, if you will, knowing that they're likely to be called on as the meeting proceeds. But that was an interesting thought. One of the more difficult things for me to deal with is interruptions. And I wish that I wish there had been more times where we had a moderator who would discourage interruptions. In this environment, if two people talk at the same time, they cancel each other out. I cannot understand what either person said. So we have to go back and have each person say the thing individually. But also with that is, as someone is talking, the people have to be respectful to let the person finish before they respond. Because to start talking over someone as they're going partway through in the virtual environment is a greater difficulty than in a room when you're one-on-one. Perhaps it's just a matter of you can't pick up on the physical keys. I don't know, but it's a more difficult and even more disruptive environment in the virtual meeting to have a lot of interruptions. And in addition, to stay on track, the leader should also track how much time is left in the meeting and what needs to be done, and if any changes have to be done, and what's scheduled for the rest of the meeting, and possibly plan for another meeting to complete tasks that will not, or there isn't time to complete them in the present meeting. So having that virtual leader is very important. The other thing is a meeting scribe. Often when we're in meetings, we may be going to our keyboard to put something into chat for the meeting, perhaps clicking on the mouse. So our hands are busy, our eyes are on the screen. It makes it a little bit harder for us to keep notes. So it's probably best to have a meeting scribe so that they can keep the notes and take notes, and after the meeting, send them out for the meeting. Basically, it's the same as the secretary of a meeting keeping the minutes, of a group keeping the minutes. But have a meeting scribe who will keep track of all the materials discussed, action items, assignees, and then have that sent out to the group after you've completed that. Once again, for those presentations that are in the meeting, test the technology before the meeting starts. Make sure that your PowerPoint comes up, you have the right PowerPoint, and it looks the way it's supposed to, and be ready to start, have it ready to start before the meeting begins. Be careful of the presentation length. It's been suggested that in these virtual meetings, brevity can foster better engagement throughout, with the audience having less likelihood of starting, or there's a reduced likelihood that members in the audience will start to become disengaged and start thinking about other things. That may be true of the in-person meetings too, but consider as the presentation is being prepared, consider how to be concise and to the point with the material that you want to present. And finally, although in some meetings in person, people will present things and say, if at any point you have a question, please ask. It's strongly recommended that in a virtual meeting, you plan for the question and answer Q&A at the end of the presentation so as not to interrupt the presenter as he's going through the material. That probably helps the presenter stay on task more. And I believe it's also better for all the others who are watching the presentation not to have to jump track as these questions come up. Now, the virtual meetings and the issues, here's a review. Technology, technology, technology. Plan ahead to avoid tech issues. Tonight, we're not going to go through a user's manual on the different technologies, but Zoom has a lot of tutorials on how to work with Zoom. Likewise for Teams. Plan ahead to mitigate tech issues. Tonight, if I were to lose my laptop, I have a desktop off to the side. I actually right now I'm working off of a hotspot as opposed to my ISP because I think it's just a little more reliable. As a side note, my internet service provider intends to replace the cable from the pedestal of the street to my house, but it hasn't been done yet. But we do have some internet issues right now. Interrupters in the meeting, people who interrupt. One suggestion also is at the start of the meeting, establish ground rules for when you want to speak, when people want to speak. Establish ground rules as to how people can raise their hand in the virtual way. On Zoom, you can raise your hand, but have some ground rules in place that will allow people to be able to speak, but where they allow the preceding speaker to finish the statement before they jump in. And one of the challenges, once again, is the loss of an attendee engagement. As you sit here and listen and watch and start to think about things and maybe hear a word that makes you go off on a different track, one of the challenges is to stay focused on the meeting. And one of the suggestions is that as the meeting goes on, a leader of the meeting will seek input from the attendees so that they are continuing to stay engaged in the meeting or perhaps get brought into the meeting by being asked for their input. Then there's the meeting follow-up. Once the meeting is done, you send out the meeting notes from the meeting scribe to all those attendees. Note down action items, note down assignments, and then assure that the action items are assigned to people and that people have received those assignments and know that they have action items that they need to complete. And finally, review the performance of the technology. What went well? What maybe didn't go so well that we need to prepare better for so that the next meeting is more effective? And in time, perhaps the technology will become more and more transparent to us, where we can focus more on the meeting material and not the technology and the subtleties of Zoom and things like that. Now, where are we going to go from here? Well, we're hoping for process improvement. We're hoping that our proficiency with our technology and managing the virtual meeting and how we conduct the meetings will improve in time. Practice makes perfect. So hopefully in time, the process of the virtual meetings will become more and more secondhand to us, just another thing that we do. And there are more virtual meetings to come, no doubt about that. People are going to be, it appears, in more remote locations, and we're not all going to be able to join the conference room at the same time. So the virtual meetings aren't just a something to help us through the pandemic period, but it's something we're gonna have to continue using going forward. Probably what we're apt to see more of now are the hybrid meetings, where you'll have some people gathered in a conference room and then others online. There will probably be some new challenges with that. It used to be that when we would all meet in a conference room with somebody on a speakerphone, sometimes after a bit, somebody would say, well, what does Jim think? And then we realized, oh yes, Jim's on the call too. Potentially, there may be more people on the virtual side of the meeting and fewer in the conference room. And unless it's, well, with the video component, it's less likely to happen. But if the video component is not there, it could be that the people in the conference room maybe not quite as well remembered as those that are in the virtual side of it, possibly. But we're going to have the hybrid meetings coming up, so we have a new element in the virtual meeting environment, as maybe those become more and more common. And finally, my final thought to you, and this is something that's just struck me during the past year, and Connie touched on this a little bit. Maybe someday, when a virtual meeting is scheduled over the noon hour, lunch will be delivered to each attendee. That concludes my talk tonight on improving the work virtual meeting. Hopefully I ended on a high note with that. Are there any questions?
Let's invite everyone to unmute at this time. And Maria actually had posted a comment in the chat to me though. So Maria, would you like to share your comment?
Yes. Yes, I saw that, and I am wondering that the common virtual meeting open doors to be connected with others, and those meetings led us to be more precise on time as well as more professional participation.
Yes, thank you. And Warren, I have a question for you too. I once read that if you're in a virtual meeting, like a work meeting, and suddenly your 2-year-old or your cat or something comes and distracts. So I'm just curious your opinion. Is it better to acknowledge that something funky is happening, or should you just ignore it and continue on?
I actually came across something about that where they suggested, I'd say during the icebreaker phase of the meeting, that people may conduct a brief tour of their surroundings to show what elements may be there, possibly a cat or a 2-year-old. And so in that particular case, they were suggesting that maybe to connect more with each individual, they do a brief tour of the surrounding area, so we don't just see the face, but see what's surrounding them as well. And I'm not sure what, I think, you know, in some conference calls that I have, usually there are in a group of 4, there's one guy who has a cat, but and the cat will sometimes, we usually make jokes about that, but that's just, you know, it's a daily meeting we have with the 4 of us. So the cat's kind of like the 5th member of our group. But I think it's interesting. In some of the meetings and with some people, that you can hear kids in the background, you know, the boys or whatever. I mean, it's just sort of a background noise, and it's just going on and everything. And I don't find it distracting. I think once in a while, not necessarily in that particular case, there'll be, I'm in this meeting right now, I'll have to help you later with this and things like that. So you have to acknowledge it's there, yes.
Okay, sounds like it can also be an opportunity for humor in the meeting.
Right.
Okay, another question I have, and we've talked about this in a couple of other of these power hour sessions, but so what is your opinion on How do you cut off a long-winded speaker? Someone who's just going beyond what's necessary.
I've complained frequently about interrupters in this talk. I've mentioned this. I think in that one, we'd have to say it's probably going to have, I don't know. I would say it's been kind of it's when the discussion has gone on longer. But when there is a break in there, typically the meeting organizer will step in and say, we're short on time. We need to close this. We need to close this up. But trying to be as diplomatic as possible about it, but nonetheless stepping in to point out that we're getting low on time here. We have more things to cover, and we need to proceed with the other material on the agenda. Because typically in those cases, it seems, at least in my experience, it's perhaps belaboring a point over and over and over when we need to move on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jim just said goodbye to us in the chat. And did anyone else have? Connie?
It looks like Connie has a question.
Yes, I think it's important to also tell your audience when you have a PowerPoint and sharing your screen. I just recently went to a Toastmasters meeting and the speaker gave a fantastic speech, but never mentioned that he was using a PowerPoint and that he was sharing his screen, and I didn't know. And I'm just like, oh, wow. And if I have two monitors and I didn't know which one to look at or how to set to make sure that there was something on the other monitor to look at. So I think a lot of people have trouble as a presenter sharing their screens, and then as an audience member, sometimes it takes a while to identify where the PowerPoint is if you have multiple screens.
15 more minutes, boy. 15.
So Warren, speaking of screen sharing, do you want to stop your screen share so we can have bigger boxes to?
Sure. Yes, please. There we go.
Hey, there we are.
There we go. Sorry about that. Connie, to your point, that reminds me of something that happens frequently. I meet with, I just moved to the other screen here. Let me see if I can drag this back over so I don't know if I'm okay there. Good. Typically 4 days a week at 7 a.m. I meet with 3 other people and we go over various technical issues. And someone will have something up on their screen and start talking, and frequently we'll have to say, are you sharing your screen? And, oh yeah, just a minute. So I can relate to what you just described. It happens frequently. And that's one of the things that yeah, it's too bad that you didn't see the PowerPoint for the whole speech. That's a shame.
And then
but I guess it's kind of making sure, asking the audience, can you see my PowerPoint?
Right. And then also on the other side of the coin, make sure that there's nothing on your screen that you don't want other people to see.
Or behind you.
Or behind you. Yeah, that's another big thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if I'm going to share my screen, I try to close everything down because I don't really want them to see my email, even my inbox or anything really. I mean, not that it's just a matter of, I'll share with them what I need to share with them. Is really kind of what my approach on that.
Hey, Warren, to that point of what Connie's points are, having to make sure that you're sharing, if you are using a scribe, maybe ask them to be the audience checker, to sit from the viewpoint of the audience, to say, hey, let me know if you can see my screen, if things aren't visible. That would be the best tip ever, because I found that helps for me, besides putting a sticker on my screen that says screen up, presentation open, lock the kids out of the room because of Lorelei, one of my dogs. She's a heavy panther and it's kind of annoying. but there's a small checklist. But if I know I'm going to have a scribe, I use them to be from an audience viewpoint. Let me know if you can't hear. Let me know if my screen goes haywire. Let me know if my audio or video starts to stutter. So that's another way to use your scribe or another key person in the audience as your assistant.
Thank you.
Great
That's a
tip.
really good suggestion.
And Warren, I also see a question in the chat from Maria. She's asking, is it convenient to stand up to honor the American flag, or is it better sitting down?
Good question. I will tell you what we do in my other Toastmasters club. The rule, we stand up. I guess the other rule when we do it, we stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance is what we do in the club. The one limitation is we need to have an image of the American flag, and once in a while we don't. And the Toastmasters rule is if you don't have a flag in the room, you don't do the pledge. But if you do have the flag, then you can do the pledge. At least that's my understanding what the rule is. I've been told that by others. It's kind of passed down through the years. So, but when we do the Pledge of Allegiance, we do stand up for the flag and for the pledge and then sit down again, even in the virtual environment.
I would say one concern about that, though, is sometimes you end up seeing people's belt buckles or other areas. So that could be a little problematic.
Well, and
That's a good point. I think people have seen people find out what's on my t-shirt rather than what's on my face. Yes, that's true.
Short of taking your monitor or your screen, I'm going to try this. And as you can see, I stood up, but now the ceiling fan is whirling in the background. I am standing up to give recognition. And then when I go to sit back down, I can grab my screen and readjust it accordingly. Right. So that is one option. But if you're using an actual camera, I don't know where mine is, you can pick it up and just, stand up holding it in your hand, but I don't know how big your face will be in the image. So that would be one of those tests to see. That's 5 cents worth. Thank you.
And if you have a ergonomic desk, it does take time for it to raise up too and going down. So if you don't know about that, the Pledge of Allegiance is over by the time you're in position.
That's true. Yes. All right. Are there other questions, other comments, thoughts?
I do. Another question is with Zooms, it seems to be the most common used software, although Teams, my organization also is now using Teams. Do you have, or does anybody else in the audience have more experience, whether you like Zoom over Teams, or how do they differ? But I really like the tip that you should be prepared to whatever they throw at you.
I think most people like Zoom, although my other club, we use WebEx, which is developed by Cisco, but the other club, the person who has the WebEx works for Cisco, so we use WebEx. So there is a WebEx out there too, which I think, I'm not real computer savvy, but I think that it's a little bit more complicated, maybe a little bit more restrictive than Zoom is. Seems that way.
For me, Connie, my company uses Skype. We're still using Skype, and we're starting to migrate into Microsoft Teams. So there are some learning activities there. I've been advised to consider going over to YouTube and just, what are the easy basic tips on how to use Teams. That way, at least you're familiar with the settings when they're activated or you have to use it. But it's a matter of taking the time to say, okay, what are the top 4 video conferencing tools out there, what are the basics for using them? And if someone sends you a link, you know, for me, make sure I know where the mute button is and the camera off button.
Camera off, especially.
Right. You know, they're comfortable seeing your name, knowing that you're there participating.
Right.
Until you get situated and set up, you know, so it makes a big difference. Whether or not you can activate the wonderful backgrounds is another thing. And so, you know, but it's take the time to become familiar with it. But I know Microsoft Teams, Skype, WebEx is the other one, Zoom, and then Google is trying to come up with their online meeting as well, or their video chat meeting as well. And then don't forget Facebook Messenger, excuse me, people are still using that to do, you know, FaceTime or whatever off your cell phone. So
yeah, there are several. Google Meet is one, and then there's one called Slack that you know certain group of people like to use Slack, and I'm sure as time goes on, there's going to be even more. You know, competition breeds more competition. So Zoom is the big boy on the block because they were there when we needed them.
Right.
But there's new ones coming out by the minute, so it seems.
One comment I will make for Toastmasters, at least, is that if you've got a corporate club that has conference rooms that have all this technology and whatever, you're probably in pretty good shape. But I'm in a community club and we meet in a library and they have, you know, a good monitor, I think, and some internet connections. But yeah, we've got to look at, you know, making sure we have laptops that are dedicated to it, microphones. That seems to be a big problem. So it's definitely an issue, I think, for community clubs.
So Robin, Showtime went through that experience where we had learned the hard way, where the video team was hauling all the equipment and cameras and monitors and microphones to set up the environment. When Trish learned from some other clubs that were doing it, to put that responsibility on the member to help share the environment. Let them bring their own laptops to the meeting to help set up so that not one person is making a large financial investment of the microphones, the cameras, the monitors, and hauling all of that back and forth. It is wonderful if the meeting location has at least the Wi-Fi and the presentation screens and that makes a big difference. My home club, Down to Earth Toastmasters, the Maricopa County Extension Office on 40th and Broadway did a major remodel. So they have the latest and greatest of the screen and the video and the internet. And it was wonderful, even with the remote for the laser pointer. So that was going fabulous. But since we haven't been able to get back to the building, we don't know if we still have a meeting location. So now we've got to look at somewhere else as the backup from there. But, you know, all members make a commitment to come to the meeting prepared. So just consider making sure that they know that they need to bring and participate as well with the setup. Bobby, I don't know if you want to share some input from that experience.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that we had when we were a hybrid club prior to COVID was that we weren't used to the technology, and we literally met at least 6 months, maybe even close to a year as a hybrid club before COVID. And so what would happen is the speaker, it's easy to look at everyone who's in the room, but we would get to look at the camera so that the people who were participating remotely felt like they were part of the group. So there was a bit of a disconnect for the remote attendees. Now that may change with the better conference room setups and whatnot. So, but just keep that in mind for your clubs or even meetings, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. You probably need at least 2 cameras in there, one to look at the audience and one to look at the front of the room, whoever's speaking up there is something. And then even if people are bringing their own laptops, I don't think you can have all of them turned on so they can be spoken to, if you will, I guess, without getting fairly serious feedback. So we're talking about, do we get a microphone that we pass around maybe, or do you have somebody go up to the front to speak? Or it seems like the sound is probably maybe the toughest thing to deal with.
It is. We had a microphone that was set up in the front of the room, but we learned that the person who is operating the main camera that, you know, showed the front of the room, if that person had sound on, it interfered with the microphone that was set up in the middle of the room. So it's tricky. It's tricky.
We're lucky that John Griffith is our video guy in my other club. John has all the stuff, so he sets everything up. That's good.
There you go. But what if he's not there one meeting? Then what?
Then we do a lot of shadow puppets and mime. We have some mime classes. And then we meet, well, we did meet, I don't know if we're going back there or not. We did meet at a meeting room inside of Denny's. Then you have the interruption of the waitress trying to do her job and you're trying to speak and the plates are being passed around. But she's got a job to do. So you have to kind of distract yourself from that. But I would think that if you're going to be physically in the room, you don't need to have all laptops, because then you're taking yourself away from the meeting. You're not participating with the people around you. So I think not having laptops, everyone having laptops in the meeting is not a great idea. Yeah, you'll probably need a couple. I know that at Denny's, they have the big screen, but they're concerned, or not Denny's, but Don and some of our other people are concerned that they have the, I don't know, the electronics setup, the setup to actually support our meetings. We're going to go hybrid. Hopefully, we're going to go hybrid. And so we have some people who are a little bit still hesitant. We haven't gone back to hybrid yet, but when we do, they're hesitant to go back to person-to-person meetings. Just like at work, I have people, there are people at work who do not want to come back. And so fortunately, our work is going to work with them, but we're trying to look into all that. So we're just now getting started at looking into that, because I don't know when we'll go back hybrid, but it seems like it's closer than it was a few months ago. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So one more comment about Showtime. We did recently vote to become a 100% online club, so we'll be able to continue with online Zoom meetings. And we're still part of District 3 because Toastmasters International at the International Convention last August, they made a rule change allowing an online club to be a districted club. And previously they were only put into District U, which meant undistricted, and you didn't have TLI, you didn't have the contest to compete in, but now we can participate fully.
Well, they joined the 21st century, finally. They're catching up with that.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that because I knew about the undistricted piece, which seemed like a pain. It's one thing if you've got members from all over the world, I guess I could see that, but where you've got the majority here, at least, even if you do have some from other places, yeah, it seems to make sense to try to keep it under a district umbrella.
Right. Because even in my home club of Down to Earth Toastmasters, we picked up 2 new members. One is down in Tucson. The other 2 joined, and actually, yeah, one is down in Tucson and she joined from there. The other 2 were here in Phoenix. One just moved up to Seattle, Washington, the VP of Education, and then the other one just moved to San Diego. We don't want to lose them. So this is like the perfect opportunity to still be hybrid so we can keep our membership count and we can keep them engaged in Toastmasters on a regular basis. So yay, international.
It's my bilingual club, Dos Lenguas. The last 3 members live up north and the rest of us live in Chandler and Tempe. And so we're looking to go hybrid as well.
Well, and La Voz de Oro is going to be hybrid, and we also have picked up members in Mexico, and we had one who is in Venezuela, but now is in the States, so.
Hey,
I think Michael has a question.
Not a question, more of a comment. Doing the inverse of what you've said, I've been going from Toastmasters Club to Toastmasters Club, and I became a member of a North Carolina club, and I live in New York.
Oh,
wow. Wow.
well,
So I can't find a local club right now.
we're glad you joined us here in Arizona.
Exactly. It's now 10:30 my time, but the subject matter seemed interesting, so I popped in.
Cool. And Warren, I see we're right at 7:30 now, so I want to thank you for doing this presentation tonight. So thank you so much, Warren.
Well, thank you. I
Good job,
appreciate it.
Lauren.
And we can continue on if you want. And Maria had posted another comment. Did you want to share with us, Maria, or would you like me to read it?
Yes, I think it's wonderful to see this time on the virtual meetings, the faces. I could see clearly the expressions, because on the conventional speeches, I could see just the faces, but I don't see clearly the eyes, I don't know, other expressions that I don't see as here. And I think it's another tool to help us to improve the speeches to speak, and I don't know.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I have a question for Michael. Since you're doing this New York, North
Uh-oh.
Frozen.
Carolina, now Arizona, and that kind of thing.
I wasn't able to hear your question. You froze at some point.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just curious how you learn about these different meetings in different locations. Is there a place you go to?
Facebook.
Oh,
Ah.
It's called the official Toastmasters site.
Yeah.
Oh.
You can go on.
And they post a lot of these.
And
Okay.
you go on to Toastmasters.com too, and Toastmastersinternational.com, and they have all the clubs there, the times they meet, you know, if they're open or closed.
I'm
I thought
learning that
about
as I
going
go along.
visiting some clubs, and I've thought about visiting some clubs elsewhere, and I might still do it. I might.
I got to see one from Dubai.
Wow.
Oh,
I visited a couple of clubs in Ireland,
Oh,
and that was a lot of fun. I love their accents.
yeah. See, I'd want them to give all the speeches so I could listen to them. Great. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to take off. Warren, great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do appreciate it. See everyone later. Take care.
Hi, Kathy.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
Okay. Well,
let's see.
Maria and Mark, if you're interested in coming to a Showtime meeting, we'd love to have you. We meet on the second and fourth Mondays at 6:30 p.m. And if you visit the website, I think it was posted in the announcement, but it's
Yes.
showtime.toastmastersclubs.org, the free Toast host site, and you can register for the meeting, and then you'll be sent the link to join us. So thank you for being here tonight. And Warren,
Yes,
again,
thank you very much.
great job, Warren.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Yes.
that.
Yes,
Okay.
thank
Very
you.
good. Yes, thank you.
All right.
See you next week or whenever.
thank you.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
All right. You take care, Maria, and Bobby, thank you.
And thank you. And thank you, Maria, for joining us
Oh,
again.
thank you. Thank you too.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye.